Some moments split a life in two. For a man named Elias, that moment came when a dying Apache woman pressed her palm to his face and chose him. He never imagined that offering a sip of water from his canteen would lead to this, to a declaration that would unravel his solitary existence and reforge it into something he no longer recognized. She wasn't asking. She wasn't pleading. She was deciding for both of them, her words not a question, but a fate. 3 days earlier, the only tracks Elias followed were those of a strayed heifer. The land was parched, brutal under a sun that showed no mercy. That's when he saw them. 2 sets of footprints, one small, one adult, dragging through the dust as if the owners were barely more than ghosts. His instinct, hardened by years of solitude, was to look away. Survival out here meant not seeing what wasn't your business. But these tracks led toward the old, dry wash, a place of death. A wrongness settled in his gut, a pull he couldn't ignore. He found them collapsed in the thin, wasted shade of a dead juniper. The woman's eyes flew open the instant his shadow fell over her. Her movement was a blur. A knife was in her hand, held low and ready, her gaze a fierce, exhausted warning. Beside her, a little girl lay still, her lips cracked and bleeding, her breath a rapid, frightening flutter in the still air. Elias raised his hands, slow and deliberate. He knew better than to startle a cornered animal. "Water," he said, his voice low, nodding to the canteen on his hip. "That's all. Just water." Her eyes, dark with mistrust, narrowed. But she didn't stop him as he crouched and uncapped the canteen. He held it out, not to her, but toward the child. It was a test. A gamble on a sliver of trust. She stared at the canteen as if it held venom, then at him as if weighing his life in her hands. Finally, with a swift, desperate motion, she snatched it and pressed it to the girl's lips. The child drank in ragged, desperate gulps, water tracing clean lines through the dust on her chin. As she drank, the woman's shoulders sagged just a fraction, as if a colossal weight had been momentarily lifted. When the canteen was empty, she handed it back, her intense, unreadable stare fixed on him. "There's more at the house," Elias said, standing. "And shade. Real shade." She didn't answer, simply gathered the limp child into her arms and stood, her own body swaying with exhaustion. Elias realized she was just as close to the edge. He turned and started walking, not looking back. The choice to follow was hers. But if she did, his quiet, broken life was over. Behind him, he heard the slow, unsteady crunch of footsteps in the gravel. Following, the walk back was a slow, painful procession. The woman, Kaya, she would later whisper, stopped often, adjusting the child's weight, her own legs threatening to buckle. Elias ached to carry the girl for her, but he knew the fragile trust between them would shatter if he tried. So he walked ahead, his pace measured, pretending not to hear her stumble, giving her the dignity of her own strength. His homestead sat in a shallow basin, a small cabin of weathered wood huddled against a rocky outcrop that offered afternoon relief. It wasn't much, but it had walls and a reliable well. She stopped at the edge of his property, her eyes scanning the windows, the door, the surrounding land for a threat only she could see. "Nobody else here," Elias said, his back to her. "Just me." The child in her arms stirred, letting out a weak, mewling sound. That decided it. Kaya crossed onto his land, but her hand never strayed far from the knife at her waist. Inside, the dim cabin was blessedly cooler. Elias gestured to the lone bed in the corner, and she laid the girl down with a tenderness that belied her fierce exterior, brushing tangled hair from a fevered forehead. The child was worse now, her skin hot to the touch, her small body trembling uncontrollably. Elias brought more water, a clean cloth, and a pinch of precious salt. Kaya watched his every move, her gaze sharp and suspicious, as he mixed the salt into the cup. When he offered it, she took it but did not give it to the child. Instead, she brought it to her own lips, tasting it first, a silent test for poison. "It's just salt. For the fever," he said quietly. She held his gaze for a long moment, then finally turned and coaxed the child to drink. And in that moment, Elias saw it. Beneath the layers of defiance and survival, a raw, terrified fear. the fear of a mother watching her child slip away. He busied himself at the stove, building a small fire, the silence between them thick and heavy. Why? The word was rough, scraped from a dry throat. He glanced back. Why help us? Her voice was low. Your people do not help mine. Elias stared into the budding flames. He had no good answer. Maybe because he knew the gut-wrenching helplessness of watching someone die. Maybe because the emptiness of his own life had become a heavier burden than the risk of letting someone in. Because she's a child, he said finally, the truth simple and stark. And children shouldn't die for the sins of others. Kaya studied him, and he felt the weight of her judgment. He kept his back to her, letting her decide who he was. My name is Kaya, she whispered into the quiet. Elias. Another silence, then, so soft it was almost lost. She is called Liana. He turned. For the first time, Kaya wasn't looking at him with suspicion, but at her daughter. The terror in her eyes was a reflection of his own past grief, a mirror of the days after he'd buried his wife and unborn child. She'll be all right, he said, a hope more than a promise. Kaya didn't reply, just pressed her hand to Liana's brow, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Elias wondered what kind of desperation made a person trust a stranger against every instinct screaming not to. The fever did not break by nightfall. It worsened. Elias didn't sleep. He sat vigil in a chair beside the bed, changing the cool cloth on Liana's forehead. His world narrowed to the fragile rhythm of her breathing. Kaya finally succumbed to exhaustion by the window, but even in sleep, her hand rested on her knife. He fought the fever through the long, dark hours. It was a fire in the child, a battle he'd seen lost before. His hands, accustomed to the roughness of rope and wood, moved with a forgotten gentleness. When Liana stirred, her eyes glassy, and whispered Mama, Elias's voice was soft. She's here. She's resting. You rest too. Near dawn, Kaya woke with a start, her eyes finding his in the dim light. She saw him there, still keeping watch, the cloth still in his hand. Something in her hardened expression softened at the edges. You did not sleep, she stated. Couldn't, he replied, his gaze returning to Liana. Not while the fever runs. She rose and crossed the room, taking the cloth from his hand, their fingers brushing briefly. She pressed her palm to her daughter's skin, her jaw tightening. Her father, a boar hunt. The tusk pierced his leg. The wound rotted. He was gone in 5 days. Her voice was flat, emptied of emotion. Elias simply nodded. My father's brother. It is our way that he should provide for us now. But he is a cruel man. I saw the marks on his first wife. I refused. She wrung out the cloth, the action tight with anger. They cast us out. Gave me 3 days to change my mind. I thought my will was strength enough for both of us. But the desert, her hands stilled. The desert does not care about will. Elias looked at her then, truly seeing the magnitude of her gamble. You did what was right. Right does not fill a belly, she bit out. Right does not break a fever. She was right. He had no argument. They worked through the morning in a weary, shared rhythm. When Kaya's hands began to shake from fatigue, Elias took over without a word. He saw the reluctant acceptance in her eyes when he insisted she rest. Then, as suddenly as it had seized her, the fever broke. Liana's skin cooled. Her breathing eased into the deep, even pattern of true sleep. Kaya stood so fast her chair clattered to the floor. She hovered over her daughter, afraid to believe. She will live, Elias said, and this time it was a certainty. Kaya turned to him. What he saw in her eyes was not gratitude. It was a profound, startling recognition. She crossed the space between them in 3 swift strides, stopping so close he could feel the heat from her skin. Her hand lifted, trembling slightly, and came to rest against his cheek. Her palm was calloused, warm, and utterly sure. I choose you, Kaya said, her voice low and final. I choose you to be the father. Elias's first instinct was to recoil. His second was to ask if the fever had stolen her senses. But he stood frozen, her palm a brand against his cheek, her words hanging in the air between them, solid and inescapable. What? He finally managed, the word a choked whisper. Kaya's hand fell, but her eyes held his. I choose you to be the father. For Liana. For me. She said it as if it were the most logical conclusion in the world, as if binding their lives together was a simple matter of course. I don't. I have nothing, he stammered. No tribe. No family. No way to keep her safe, Kaya countered, her voice steady, belying the desperation in her eyes as she glanced at her sleeping daughter. You saved her. You fought for her through the night. That kindness, it means you are a good man. That is everything. It doesn't mean I'm ready to be a father. The word felt foreign, painful on his tongue. Father. He'd once dreamed of it, of painting a small room and choosing a name with his wife. But that dream had bled out on this very floor, leaving behind only silence and a ghost. You already are, Kaya said softly. You just do not see it yet. Elias turned away, raking a hand through his hair. This was madness. He'd offered shelter, a basic human decency, not a lifetime commitment. He'd built walls around his heart for a reason. Attachment was a prelude to loss. I can work, Kaya continued, her voice firm behind him. I can tend animals, heal with plants, cook. I can teach Liana. We will not be a burden. That's not my worry. Then what is? He turned to face her, the old bitterness rising like bile. What happens when you regret this? When you're trapped here with a broken man who couldn't even save his own family? She didn't flinch. What happens when you regret it? When the weight of another man's child becomes too heavy to bear? That's different. Why? Because you hold the power. She shook her head, her dark eyes piercing. My risk is greater. If this fails, I have nowhere to go. You can walk away. I cannot. She was right. The imbalance of it was terrifying. He'd seen how power twisted men, how his own father had turned cruel with it. The thought of holding that over her made him sick. I will not force you, Kaya said, her tone softening. When Liana is strong, if you wish us to leave, we will go. I will find another way. She paused, her gaze intense. But I ask you to consider it. I saw something in you last night. A kindness that asks for nothing. That is a rare thing in this world. Elias looked at Liana, her face peaceful in sleep, then at Kaya, standing with a queen's dignity while asking for a king's mercy. He thought of the crushing silence of his years alone, the gray sameness of his days. If I say yes, he said slowly, it is not for what you can do for me. You are not a servant. This is not a romance. Then what is it? Survival, Elias stated. For all of us. But there will be rules. Respect. Boundaries. Kaya nodded. I agree. You and Liana take the bed. I take the floor. Agreed. No one touches the other without permission. Agreed. And if this does not work, we speak of it. Honestly. No lies. No disappearing in the night. Kaya extended her hand. Elias stared at it for a long moment before taking it. Her grip was calloused, strong, and sure. It felt like sealing a pact with fate itself. Then we have an arrangement, Kaya said. And Elias was left wondering if he had just saved his life or ruined it. 3 days passed, and the silent cabin began to breathe. The air filled with sounds Elias had forgotten, the soft scuff of small feet at dawn, the low murmur of Kaya singing in a language he didn't know, the rhythmic scrape of a knife preparing a meal. It was the sound of life, and it unsettled him as much as it soothed him. Liana recovered with a child's resilience. Soon she was sitting up, her wide, curious eyes following his every move. Then she was standing, wobbling on unsteady legs, her determination a fierce, tiny flame. Elias found himself pointing at things, saying their names. Water. Sky. Stove. She would repeat them, her voice giving the common words a soft, musical lilt. When she pointed to the cabin itself and said, home, Kaya looked up from her grinding stone, her expression unreadable, but she said nothing. Their arrangement settled into a quiet rhythm. Kaya worked with a quiet efficiency that shamed his own long-accepted mess. She mended his shirts, organized the clutter in the corners, and turned his meager supplies into meals that tasted like life itself. When he told her she didn't have to, she fixed him with that steady gaze. I said I would not be a burden. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He had no answer. The truth was he liked it. He liked the scent of herbs she hung by the door, the way she hummed when she thought he wasn't listening, the simple, solid fact of her presence. But to say so felt like a betrayal of their carefully drawn lines. Yet the lines began to blur in fleeting, electric moments. When she reached for a jar on a high shelf and her arm brushed his chest, a jolt of heat went through him. When their hands touched on the water bucket handle, neither pulled away immediately. Once, he caught her watching him as he repaired a fence post, sweat on his brow. When their eyes met, something unspoken and potent passed between them, a raw acknowledgment of the man and woman they were, living in such close quarters. He was always the first to look away. To acknowledge it felt like stepping into a dangerous, unknown country. On the fourth morning, as Elias was showing Liana how to scatter grain for the chickens, Kaya's voice cut through the calm, sharp and low. Elias. He turned. She was at the window, her body rigid, her gaze fixed on the eastern hills. Someone is coming. He told Liana to stay and strode to the house. He didn't need to ask who. The way her hand had gone to the knife at her belt was answer enough. Your tribe? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Yes. Her voice was flat, all the morning's softness gone. They have come for me. What do they want? To bring me back. To force the marriage. She didn't need to finish. The unspoken consequence hung in the air. If she refused again, they would take Liana. How long? 20 minutes. Perhaps less. Elias looked from her tense face to Liana, happily chasing a chicken, oblivious. He thought of his rules, his boundaries, his years of avoiding trouble. He thought of the man he'd become, cautious, isolated, safe, and he felt a surge of contempt for that man. Get Liana inside, he said, his voice low and steady. Stay away from the windows. Kaya grabbed his arm, her fingers tight. Elias, you do not understand. These men, they will not ask twice. I know, he said, meeting her fearful gaze with a calm he didn't fully feel. Then we will not ask once. Something in his expression must have convinced her. She gave a single, sharp nod and went to gather her daughter. Elias walked to the corner and took down his old rifle from its pegs. The metal was cool, the weight familiar. He checked the chamber, loaded it, and walked to the doorway to wait. The riders were closer now, close enough to make out the grim set of their faces. The next hour, he knew, would decide everything. The three riders halted 50 paces out, the dust settling around their horses' hooves. They sat with the easy confidence of men who were used to being obeyed. The leader, a man with a scar running down his cheek and eyes like chips of flint, dismounted. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. Elias stepped onto the porch, the rifle held loosely at his side. This is private land, he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. State your business or move on. The scarred man took a step forward. We are here for the woman, Kaya. She belongs with her people. People don't belong to anyone, Elias replied. Our ways are not your ways. She was given a choice. She made the wrong one. Looks to me like she made her choice, and you didn't like it. The man's jaw tightened. You do not understand. This is about honor, family obligation. Her obligation is to that child inside, Elias said, his voice hardening. Everything else comes second. The child needs a father, a real father, from her own people. That girl has a father, Elias said, the words feeling truer than he expected as he spoke them. Me. And they aren't going anywhere unless Kaya tells me different. The warrior studied him, calculating the odds. Finally, he called out, Kaya, come out. Let us speak. The cabin door opened. Kaya emerged, positioning herself beside Elias, her shoulder nearly touching his. She faced the three men, her spine straight. Chaska, she said, and the name was like a curse. You have caused enough trouble, the man Chaska said. It is time to come home. Your daughter needs to learn our ways. She needs safety, Kaya countered, her voice like iron. I will not find that with you. I have never raised a hand to a woman. Your first wife would tell a different story from her grave." The accusation landed like a physical blow. One of the younger warriors shifted uneasily in his saddle. They knew. Chaska's face darkened. "You have no proof. You speak lies." "I saw the bruises," Kaya said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with fury. "I helped her hide them. Do not speak to me of honor." Chaska took another step, and Elias raised the rifle a mere inch, a silent, unmistakable warning. The man stopped. "So this is your choice?" Chaska spat. "You choose this, farmer, over your own people." "I choose a man who sees my daughter as a person, not property," Kaya said. "I choose life for her. The council will not allow this. Your father will not allow it. My father lost the right to command me when he traded me to a murderer." Chaska's hand went to the blade at his side. The two younger warriors tensed. Time seemed to slow. Elias's finger found the trigger, his world narrowing to the man in front of him. "You need to leave," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." Chaska's eyes darted from Elias's face to the rifle, to the high ground of the porch. The math of violence was clear. "This is not over," he snarled. "The council will decide. You will answer for taking what is not yours." "She is not a thing to be taken," Elias replied. "And I answer to no one for giving shelter." With a final venomous glare, Chaska mounted his horse and led the others away. Elias didn't lower the rifle until they were specks on the horizon. Only then did he see that Kaya was shaking. Inside, the bravado faded, leaving a cold dread in its wake. Kaya sank onto a chair, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I have condemned us," she whispered. "When they return, it will not be to talk." "Then we will be ready," Elias said, crouching before her. "You do not understand. They will punish you. For interfering. For taking me." She looked at him, her fear laid bare. "I should go. Before it is too late." "No." The word was absolute, final. It surprised him as much as it did her. Somewhere in the chaos, the arrangement had become a vow. "Why?" she asked, the question holding the weight of her world. "Why risk everything for us?" Elias stood and walked to the porch, looking out at the land that had been his prison and his refuge. "My wife," he began, the words rusty from disuse. "Clara. She died because I wasn't here. I was in town trading. The baby came early. By the time I returned." He couldn't finish. "I spent years believing that if I didn't care for anyone, I couldn't fail them again. That is not failure. That is tragedy," Kaya said, coming to stand beside him. "You cannot live your life preparing for the next storm." "Is that not what you have been doing?" he asked. "Surviving." "Yes," she admitted softly. Until this." The space between them crackled with unspoken feeling. He could feel the warmth of her, smell the sage in her hair. It would be so easy to close the distance. Elias forced himself to step back. "Chaska." He acted like there was more to this. "Something you haven't told me." Kaya's face closed off. She turned away, her shoulders tense. For a long moment, he thought she would not answer. "My husband," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was not killed in a hunting accident." She wrapped her arms around herself. "He was murdered. By Chaska's younger brother. It was over land rights. I saw them argue. I knew, but I could not prove it. The council called me a grieving liar." The pieces clicked into place with chilling clarity. "That's why Chaska wants you back so badly," Elias said. "If you're his wife, you can't testify against his brother." Kaya nodded, her expression bitter. "And my father supports it for a place on the council. This was never about honor. It is about power and covering up a crime." Elias looked toward the hills, and a cold certainty settled in his gut. This would not end with a warning. It would end in blood. They came back 2 days later. Not 3 men, but 7. And at their head, beside Chaska, was an older man with gray hair and a face carved from stone. Kaya stiffened. "My father," she whispered. Elias held the rifle ready. "You are not welcome here." The older man spoke, his voice laced with authority. "I am Ben, an elder of our people. I have come to end my daughter's dishonor and bring her home." "There is no dishonor in refusing a murderer," Elias replied. The words landed like a thunderclap. Warriors shifted. Ben's face darkened, but it was Chaska who reacted, his hand flying to his blade. "I accuse your brother." Kaya stepped forward, her voice ringing out. "I accuse him of murder. And I accuse you, father, of selling your daughter to hide the truth." She pointed to the two younger warriors from the first visit. They were there. They saw the argument. They know the truth. All eyes turned to the two men. They looked at the ground, their silence a damning confirmation. Ben's stern expression fractured, just for a moment, into something resembling doubt and shame. "Even if this is true," he said, his voice strained, "you are bound by our law." "I am bound by no law that protects killers," Kaya declared. "And the child," Ben said, turning to Elias. "She belongs with her people. She belongs with her mother," Elias stated, stepping to Kaya's side. "And with me. Family is not blood. It is who stays. It is who chooses you." He looked at Kaya, then back at her father. "I choose them. Every day." For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. Then Ben turned and barked a sharp command at Chaska in their own tongue. After a tense silence, Chaska gave a curt, furious nod. Ben looked at Kaya one last time, a complex mix of regret and resignation in his eyes. "You have your mother's spirit," he said quietly. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. The others followed, leaving only dust and silence in their wake. The threat was over. The future was theirs. When they were gone, Kiona's knees buckled. Dalton caught her before she hit the ground, and she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to tear her apart. He held her, feeling her tears soak into his shirt, and realized that somewhere in the past week, these two people had stopped being strangers and started being something else entirely. "Thank you," Kiona whispered against his chest. "You don't have to thank me for doing what's right." "I wasn't thanking you for that." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes red but clear. "I was thanking you for being the father I chose. The one Liana deserves. The one I didn't know we needed until you were there." Behind them, the door opened and Liana peeked out. When she saw that the men were gone, she ran to them both, wrapping her small arms around their legs. Dalton reached down and picked her up, settling her against his hip like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe this is what family looked like when you stopped expecting it to follow rules and just let it become what it needed to be. "Home?" Liana asked, looking between them. Kiona smiled through her tears and touched Dalton's face. The same gesture she'd made days ago when everything changed. "Yes," she said softly. "Home." And Dalton, who'd been alone for so long he'd forgotten what that word meant, finally understood that home wasn't a place. It was the people you chose to keep safe, the ones who chose you back. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another powerful frontier tale where unexpected choices change everything. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more stories like this one. Your support means the world to us.